welcome back. So for today's project, we are going to be working on something that I am pretty excited about. We are going to be machining an 18-inch cast iron straight edge. I have wanted one of these tools pretty much ever since I started getting into machining. However, if you've ever looked at these, then you'll know that a straight edge of this size can be very, very expensive. For a finished straight edge, 18-inch camelback like this one, you're easily looking at several $100s, and even if you just buy the raw castings like this one is, you're $200–300 after shipping. So for that reason, it's just never made a lot of sense for me to get one into the shop, but it's always been on the list. That is until recently. I came across this one and a gentleman was selling it for literally pennies on the dollar for what they're going for on the website right now. And not only did I get this for an incredibly good deal, but the person that I bought it from even delivered it right to my front door. So if you're watching, thank you so very much, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. So with all that out of the way, I think that that's enough talking. Let's get started. Alright, so first things first, before we can start machining, there is a little bit of preliminary work that we have to do to the casting. Because this is a raw casting, it is of course covered in all of these sort of little imperfections that are a part of the casting process. For instance, there's this obvious ridge that runs along the center of the part. That is flashing, which is caused by the parting line in the sand mold. And if you look on the bottom of the casting, you'll see there are these two kind of big lumps. Those are, I don't know, I guess risers or something, I'm not really sure. But there's that flashing line again, and if you just look around the part, you'll just see lots of little imperfections like that are all just a natural part of the sand casting process. So before we start machining, we want to go over the entire surface of the casting, smooth out as much of that stuff as we can, file it all down, and just make this surface as nice as possible. Fun fact, I recently learned that this process of cleaning up a casting is actually called fettling the casting. Yes, there is a specific word for this process. Don't ask me where that word comes from or how it relates in any way whatsoever to what I'm doing here, but there it is, fettling the casting. To get started, I'm just going to attack this thing with an angle grinder. I really want to get these big lumps on this bottom surface ground down. And really, the bulk of this work is going to be done with this grinder, and then I'll just clean things up a little bit with some files at the end. And here's how it looks after a little bit of cleanup. I think that it's starting to look pretty nice. I didn't go too crazy on this. You could really work this until these seams start to blend in and disappear completely. But really, all that I wanted was to knock off all of that sharp stuff and make sure that it feels nice and smooth in the hand, which it does. After painting, these seams are going to disappear even more, and I think it's going to look really nice. I didn't go quite as far on the bottom. All that I really wanted on this bottom surface was to knock down these two big high spots so that I had a bit more of a, I guess, flat or level surface to start milling on. And with that, we are ready to start machining, which we are going to do on the Brown & Sharpe horizontal milling machine. All right, so I guess I might as well let you in on what I'm currently dealing with, let you share the misery with me a little bit. So I was doing some filming and the machine was running in the background. I just wanted to let it run and let the spindle bearings get warm and, you know, just let the machine warm up a little bit because it hasn't been started in a while. And so it's running and everything's going fine, and then suddenly it shuts off. Now, I've had this problem with this particular machine before, and let me just show you what I think the problem is, and then I'll show you what I'm currently doing to try and, I don't know, get around it for now at least. All right, so obviously I don't have three-phase in my shop. The Bridgeport is running on a VFD, the lathe is running on a solid state converter, and this is running on this, I don't even know what this is. So when I bought the machine, the guy gave this to me with the machine, and I did a little bit of research, and it did not fill me with a lot of confidence. However, because converters are very expensive, I decided to try and use it. And this will start the machine up just fine. It'll run the machine, but after about 10 or 15 minutes, the machine will just shut off. And this is, I think, the third time that this has happened to me with this thing. But every other time that it's happened, it's been, you know, it's been while I've been working on the machine and doing different things. And I wasn't 100% sure what was going on. So I figured, let me try and use the machine for a project, and that's going to tell me whether or not there's really an issue. Well, there is really an issue, and I am really thinking and hoping that this is the issue. So now let me show you what I'm doing to try and get around this issue, for now at least. This is the phase converter that I use to run my lathe. This is a Phase-O-Matic solid state converter, and this is a good converter. This has always been super reliable. I have never had any issues with it. It runs the lathe flawlessly. So what I'm thinking is, because these are super expensive, these are like several $100s. So I'm just going to try and connect the mill and the lathe to the same converter and hope that it works long enough to get this project done. I'm getting to the point now where, you know, I have enough three-phase machines in this shop that I would really like to do something better about the three-phase power. This sort of mix match of different solid state converters and VFDs, you know, having multiple machines hooked to the same converters, and it's just not ideal. So I don't know, I would like to do something better, but aside from buying a whole bunch of new converters, which is expensive in itself, you know, the only other option is a rotary, which is just crazy expensive, so I can't see that happening, but I don't know. Hopefully this is going to work out and it's not going to be a really big deal. It's just going to take a bunch of time, so tonight is pretty much shot. I'm just dealing with this now, so I figured I'd do some filming about it. But I just want to get it done, so I'm not going to bother, you know, trying to move the camera around and stuff like that. So I'm just doing this handy cam thing and just, you know, letting you guys in on what's going on. So I guess I'll get back to it.
2 hours later.
Well, connecting to the Phase-O-Matic converter seems to have done the trick, so we are now back on track. I have decided to clamp the part directly to the milling table to work on this bottom surface. In a lot of ways, working on this horizontal machine is fairly unintuitive for me. My only experience with the milling machine has, of course, been working on vertical machines, and you just sort of go about things in a different way on these horizontal machines. I have been watching some videos and just trying to get an idea as to how people use these things and what the sort of standard practices are. I did see Keith Rucker do a straight edge similar to this one, and he clamped it down in a very similar manner, and it just seems to make sense to me, so that's what we're going with here. Because I have a good deal of material to remove before I start to flatten out this bottom surface, I'm going to start out using this face mill to do the bulk of that material removal. This tool isn't actually big enough to cut that entire surface in one pass, but that's okay because I'm just using this to get all of that flattened out so that I can come back with a bigger tool later. And at this point, it's really just a lot of back and forth until this thing starts to flatten out and I get a nice uniform surface across the bottom here. I am being very conservative with my depth of cut and my feed rates here. I'm just not really familiar with using this type of machine or this sort of setup, and I don't want to push it. The last thing that I want to do is to send this straight edge flying across the shop or something. Now that it's cleaned up and I've gotten to a relatively flat surface, I'm going to move to a fly cutter for the finish pass. I'm moving to the fly cutter for two main reasons. One is, of course, because the fly cutter cuts an area large enough for me to cut the entire surface in one pass. And the second reason is the fly cutter is going to give me a much nicer surface finish, which will be a better place to start from whenever I move to scraping or grinding or whatever I decide to do next. There is one more thing that I want to do before I break down this setup, and that's clean up this back edge. Because I'm doing this in the same setup, this is going to guarantee that this surface comes out square to the bottom surface. And while there's no real particular reason to do this, I could leave this as cast if I really wanted. I figure since I have access to it, I might as well go ahead because an extra square surface on a straight edge certainly isn't going to hurt anything, and it's going to make setup for the front bevel much easier later. Well, it's coming out pretty nice so far, I think. The iron is machining really nice. The finishes look pretty good. The only thing that I'm noticing, and I don't know how well it's going to come up on camera, but towards the center of this surface here, the metal is a bit porous. If you can see, there's sort of looks like these little black dots everywhere. Those are actually like little pores in the metal. You don't see them towards the edges of the casting, but as you get towards the middle, you can see them. I'm not really sure what that's about. I don't really think it's a big deal. I'm not really worried about it, but you know, it's there. But aside from that, I think it looks pretty darn good. So the only thing that we have left to do now is to machine the bevel on the front of the casting. So I'll get set up for that and we'll knock it out. Okay, I know that this might look a little bit crazy, but hear me out. By laying this bar across the casting and then clamping directly on the bar, this is allowing me to direct the clamping forces through the casting and straight down into that 90-degree seat in the V-block. So this setup is actually pushing the casting down into the V-block. This is going to ensure that my casting stays nice and square and secure, of course, through the entire machining process here. And my wedge is going to end up at a nice 45-degree angle to my bottom surface. And I also align the entire thing parallel to the movement of the x-axis, which I know is completely unnecessary for this setup, but I'm just getting used to doing setups on this milling machine, and I figured it was good practice. Also, nailed it, just saying. And the rest is just keep taking passes until this surface cleans up. Nothing really interesting to note here, except for maybe two things. One, this cutter that I'm using really needs to be sharpened. And two, I did end up having to take off about 1/4 of an inch before this surface cleaned up. Not really a huge deal, just it was more than I was expecting. But it did clean up and came out really nice. And there it is, one fully machined cast iron straight edge. I am pretty happy with how this thing came out. Got some pretty nice surface finishes, which I guess is to be expected. I mean, it's cast iron and it usually machines pretty well. But I mean, all in all, I think the whole operation went pretty smooth. Interesting and questionable setups aside, everything went pretty smooth, I think, and I am pretty happy with the results. There is, of course, still more work to be done. It's now going to need to be scraped flat on all of those surfaces. It'll need to be painted, so there's still plenty to do, but for a first step, yeah, I'm happy with the results. I think that it's starting to look pretty nice. And I guess that's about it for this one. Thank you for coming along for the ride. I hope that you enjoyed the vid. I certainly was happy to finally get a chance to use my Brown & Sharpe milling machine. Although I do think it's a little bit ironic that the very first thing that I do after spending all of those hours cleaning it is to cover it and the rest of my shop in cast iron dust, which is some of the nastiest stuff on the planet, and it is literally everywhere on everything. I'm going to be cleaning for hours after this, but it was absolutely worth it. I am definitely happy to be started on my first Camelback straight edge, so that's pretty exciting. So definitely worth it there. As usual, if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so very much. I do appreciate each and every person who watches, and especially when you watch this far into the vid, lets the algorithm know that you liked it, which means it'll be shared with more people, so thank you for that. An extra special thank you to my patrons, the most generous, most awesome, and possibly craziest people on the planet who actually find what I do valuable and support my work. Thank you so much. You make all of this possible, and you inspire me, and you're just the absolute best, so thank you. Which reminds me, I do have a Patreon. If you like what I do here and you also would like to support my work, you can do so there. Link will be in the description. If you're a subscriber, thank you for that as well. If you haven't subscribed but you like what I do here and you feel like I've earned it, give me a like and a subscribe. If you feel like I haven't, let me know what I can do better in the comments down below. And as always, until next time, get out there, make something awesome. Most importantly, have some fun, and I hope to see you all again very, very soon.